A girl went for a walk and disappeared under unusual circumstances. What happened afterwards was very surprising. Nobody could count on so many unexpected turns and shocking discoveries. This incident became one of the most confusing in history, but ultimately, the investigators were able to find out the truth. Christy Malins grew up in a large family in Columbus, Ohio. She was born on the 28th of August in the year 1966. Together with 4 siblings, she enjoyed life in a quiet suburb, far away from the noise of city streets. In the summer of 1975, Christy was particularly drawn to spending her time outdoors. Especially, she liked to visit the local swimming pool that was located near her house, in an area where many of her friends lived. One day, on the 22nd of August, Christy was offered a part-time job as a babysitter. The next day, after she had slept in until noon, Christy decided to make use of the hot day, when the thermometer reached 34 degrees, and went to the swimming pool. Together with her younger sister Kim, they went to the residential complex where the swimming pool was located. Kim immediately dived into the cool water while Christy decided to stay on a deck chair in the sun. Shortly after Christy and her friend had talked at the pool and walked away together, Kim was surprised that her sister had left her alone without warning. However, she decided not to follow them and stayed swimming instead. Later, Kim went home, but found no trace of her sisters. A few hours later, she began to worry as Christy had not even returned for lunch. The girl went out onto the street to look for her sister and soon met a neighbor who conveyed a strange message to her. A few hours ago, a person was found a few kilometers from here whose identity had not yet been established. Kim hurried home and shared this information with her parents, who immediately contacted the police and filed a missing person report. The police invited them to come to the place where the personal belongings were kept to help identify the person found. At first, the parents did not recognize the girl, but the mother noticed a characteristic birthmark on the leg and recognized that it was Christy. The investigators, after confirming her identity, informed the parents about the details of the incident and placed great emphasis on providing support to their family during this difficult time. Shortly after 1:30 in the afternoon, the emergency service received a call from a man who reported an interesting find in the forest behind the shopping center. Together with his wife and son, he was on his way to buy toys for his son. But before they entered the store, their son wanted to explore the wooded area behind the building. There is a path known to locals that leads to the river and is often chosen because of its picturesque beauty. Determined to enjoy nature, they followed the path. On the way back, they saw an unusual sight. Some 10 meters away from the path, someone was bending over something and holding a branch. When this person noticed that they were being watched, they quickly stood up and disappeared between the trees. The man immediately called the emergency service and described the incident, emphasizing that it was necessary to check the location of the unusual occurrence. At the edge of the road, near the location of the incident, the family father found objects that indicated an unpleasant event. His wife, who had medical training, tried to help, but it was already too late. Since there were no mobile phones yet, the man quickly drove to the nearest shopping center and called the police from there. The couple described an unknown person to the investigators. A young man, tall and slim, about 20 years old, with long, dark hair down to his shoulders. He wore denim shorts and boots. Based on this description, the police quickly created a wanted poster. The investigation of the location of the incident did not bring the expected results. A piece of wood that was probably used during the incident was found, but no important clues were found that could lead to the identification of the unknown person. The t-shirt and boots that Christy wore that day were found nearby. However, medical experts could not find any other significant traces that could help with the investigations. The investigators suspected that the perpetrator could not complete his intention because he was noticed by passers-by. The police, although initially no clues were available, quickly found a direction for further investigation. Christy's younger sister shared that she had last seen the girl at the swimming pool in the company of her friend Carol. The investigators decided to meet with Carol to get more information. She told that on the day of the disappearance, an unknown person called who presented himself as a DJ of a local radio station. He informed her that soon a curling competition would take place in their city with free tickets to the state fair as prizes. The event would begin at the shopping center at 35 minutes before 1, and they should wait at the edge of the forest for further instructions, which seemed suspicious to the investigators. But the further details were even stranger. Originally, Carol had planned to go to the event with her sister, but on the way they met Christy and her sister. Ultimately, Carol invited Christy to join them. After they had left their sisters behind, they went to the shopping center and reached the beginning of the path, where they decided to wait by settling down on a fence. However, nobody appeared. After some time, Carol went to check the time in the shopping center and returned after a couple of minutes, but Christy was no longer there. Carol waited a little more, but when nobody appeared, she ultimately went away. During the investigation, the police found no confirmation that a curling competition had taken place in the city. The investigators suspected that the call was either someone's attempt to create favorable conditions or simply a prank that had nothing to do with the disappearance. In this case, the identity of the caller could not be established, as it was impossible to trace the call back. The investigation also encountered contradictory statements from Carol. She claimed that she had met Christy and her sister by chance on the way to the shopping center, while Kim insisted that the encounter took place at the swimming pool. The situation became more complicated after, on the evening of the same day, Christy's mother and Carol had an unusual conversation near the house. Carol apologized and expressed her regret that the events had developed this way, and added that she originally should have been in Christy's place, and that 2 people were involved. The puzzled mother tried to learn more, but Carol broke off the conversation and walked away. This information was transmitted to the police, who spoke with Carol again. However, she denied her earlier statements and confirmed her original version of events. During an interrogation with a lie detector, no signs of untruth were found in her answers, which made it possible to remove her from the list of main suspects. In the following days, after the news about the incident had spread throughout the district, the public was concerned, aware that the person responsible for the incident was still free. This was aggravated by police assumptions that the case might be connected with someone from the local population who was familiar with the surroundings of the shopping center. In the course of 3 days after the incident, law enforcement intensified the search for the suspect, and soon there was a breakthrough. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a police officer was patrolling in the center of Columbus, where he suddenly spotted a person who strikingly resembled the face in the wanted photo based on witness statements. The police officer immediately made contact with the investigators, who quickly arrived at the location. The man, who introduced himself as 25-year-old Jack Carman, was asked to voluntarily come to the station to have a conversation. Despite his consent and willingness to cooperate, the officers encountered a new problem. Jack had peculiarities in his mental health, which is why his mental abilities, which were rated at 50 points, required a special approach in handling. He lived in apartments provided by a charitable organization where he also worked. Difficulties arose because he had problems reading, writing, and expressing his thoughts. The interrogation lasted 6 hours, and during this time Jack mostly answered with one word or remained silent altogether. The officers began to doubt whether he fully understood the questions. But when they moved to the simplest and clearest formulations, he began to give them information. According to his statement, on that day he left his home, took the bus to the shopping center to buy clothes. As he crossed the parking lot, he saw Christy at the beginning of a path that led into the forest and approached her. The events developed quickly, and after inappropriate actions, he quickly returned to the road and got on the bus. The next day, the officers went together with Jack into the forest, where he showed the location of his actions. During the investigation, Jack shared information that apparently only someone who was directly involved in the incident could know. For example, he mentioned that a wooden object had broken into 2 parts. In addition, a recognition procedure was conducted in which the couple who first found Christy was to identify the person they had seen that day. They chose Jack without hesitation, whereupon several charges were presented to him. Although some accusations were not confirmed by medical experts, Jack confessed to them himself, which allowed the prosecution not to remove these points from the list of charges. The prosecutor sought the strictest possible punishment that the state's law provides. However, Jack's defense, with his consent, proposed a deal according to which he would acknowledge his actions in court and receive life imprisonment. The case attracted the attention of thousands of spectators and developed with incredible speed. Already on the 3rd of September, 11 days after the incident, Jack was sentenced to life imprisonment. But this quick trial left many doubting his guilt. With each new report in the media about Jack's confessions and details about his person, more and more people began to wonder whether he was actually involved in the incident. Everyone who knew Jack initially did not believe that he could do something bad. They said he was always calm and could agree to everything if persistently asked, even if it was not the case. For example, in a charitable organization, he took responsibility for a defective boiler, although he had nothing to do with it. He also had problems describing events in detail because he normally did not speak much, but the police claimed that he had described everything precisely. His acquaintances thought that the investigators might give him hints by asking questions that already contained answers. For example, they asked whether he had used something during the incident, and if Jack said yes, this could be interpreted as a confession. His therapist said that under pressure, he could say yes to everything, especially if told about the possible serious consequences. His supporters found out that the police had brought him together with witnesses, a couple, to the scene of the incident, who later recognized him among other people. This gave the impression that they already knew him before he was officially recognized. The police claimed that the witnesses had not seen Jack until that day, but nobody believed them. In this case, there were several aspects that raised serious questions. For example, the police failed to find even one witness among the bus drivers or passengers who could confirm that they had seen Jack in the city center without outerwear, although he claimed to have come home this way. The decisive point, however, were the statements of several people from the charitable organization where Jack lived and worked. They testified that they had seen him around midday, which made his presence at the shopping center on the outskirts at 11:55 impossible. Even if he had left immediately after the statements, the bus ride to the shopping center would have taken at least 40 minutes. All these circumstances left many doubting his guilt, and some even suspected that the police might have manipulated his confession. Even Christie's parents doubted his involvement in the incident. On the 9th of September, only 6 days after the verdict, about 70 people gathered in front of the city administration building to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. As a result, a public committee was formed to achieve justice, which helped Jack find a new lawyer who immediately filed an application for a review of the case. Several months later, the judge overturned Jack's confession and scheduled a new trial in which the prosecution was forced to prove his guilt again, which seemed almost impossible. During the preparation for the new trial, Norman Mallins, Christie's father, began his own investigation. From the beginning, he was convinced of the investigators' ineffectiveness and decided not to rely on the police, but to search for answers himself. Shortly after the incident, a man together with some residents went into the woods to check. During the search, he found Jen shorts and his friends discovered men's underwear. These items were handed over to the police, who initially did not attach great importance to them. It remained unclear whether they were ultimately added to the case files. 2 years after the events, a new court trial began in Jack's matter. The defense in court had two main goals: to prove Jack's innocence and to find the real perpetrator. They already had a candidate, Henry Newell, the man who had found Christie together with his wife. At this time, he was 25 years old. At the beginning of the trial, the defense presented an impressive list of arguments indicating that Henry might be involved in the crime. During the course of the trial, the evidence against him increased. Henry had already had a history of legal violations since his youth, had been in prison several times, and had escaped justice twice before being arrested again. At the time the trial began, he was serving a fourth sentence for manipulations on his house to obtain an insurance payment. The analysis of the files from Christie's case revealed several suspicious points. In particular, Henry claimed in his statement that when he found Christie, he immediately pushed aside a piece of wooden beam. He justified his actions with stress. However, his actions still appeared questionable. Collecting objects that were connected to the incident and moving them away from the actual scene of the event, without apparent reason, was unusual. Furthermore, he said that he wanted to help, therefore he took off his shirt and placed it on Christie's face. This gesture also raised questions. Did he really want to help, or was he trying to hide traces on his shirt? Jack's lawyers found out that Henry ran to the nearest shopping center after the incident to call the police. A store employee noticed that he was only wearing jean shorts, although he had already put on other clothes when the police arrived. The same employee noticed a fresh mark on his face, which the police had overlooked for some reason. When asked why she did not share this information immediately, she said that no one had asked her about it. Nevertheless, the investigators should probably have noticed this clue, but they did not pay attention to it. It is interesting that Henry initially did not object to the lie detector test, but later cancelled it due to his discomfort. Thereupon, the police decided not to question him again. Henry's neighbor got involved in this story, who shared important information. On the evening of the incident, he noticed numerous fresh scratches on Henry's arms. Additionally, the neighbor saw a telephone cable in Henry's garage that resembled the one that was later found among the evidence. This information made the investigators think even more. The neighbor added that Henry told him a strange story about how he and Carol, an acquaintance of Christie, spent time at the pool when Henry was 25 years old. This story raised many questions, although it could not be confirmed by anyone. Nevertheless, this story confirmed that Henry knew Carol, who was also involved in the case. At the trial, Henry's wife Pam appeared. She confirmed that they had indeed driven to the shopping center that day to do shopping. After that, her son went into the woods where he found some strange objects. Pam added that Henry had been at home until that point and only went outside briefly to investigate a strange noise. Carol assured the court that she had never known Henry. She answered questions about what she meant when she said that everything had gone too far, although she denied in court ever having said such words. Henry, who was brought directly from custody to the courtroom, repeated his original story and insisted on his innocence in the incident. The complete video recording of Jack's interrogation became a key moment of the court proceedings. After the video was watched, it became clear that Jack was under pressure to confirm the information provided by the investigators about his involvement in the incident. Jack appeared reserved and seemed not to fully understand what was expected of him. But that was not yet the most sensational moment of the trial. On the fifth day of the hearings, an unexpected witness appeared whom neither the prosecution nor the defense had expected. It was Bobby, Henry's adopted son. His testimony surprised everyone present. Bobby reported that Henry had actually left the house to drive away the noisy children in their yard. Contrary to his mother's words, the man was away much longer, more than 30 minutes. When he returned, his sandals and his t-shirt were missing, and marks were visible on his face and hands. After that, Henry asked his wife Pam into another room for a conversation. After that, they told Bobby they would drive to the shopping center. There, they walked along a forest path behind the building. Bobby emphasized that he had not asked to walk exactly there, contrary to his parents' claims. Shortly thereafter, they found one of Henry's torn sandals. Further along, they found more traces. His mother immediately asked Bobby to remain silent about what had happened. The boy decided to tell the truth only after a conversation with his biological father, who convinced him not to hide the information. At a court session, Henry's grandmother shared memories of a trip with him and Pam to a memorial service for Christie. On the way home, she expressed her concern about the situation, whereupon Henry unexpectedly remarked that this should make the participants more careful in their statements. A friend of Henry also testified that Henry had once confessed an unintentional misconduct to him. The court proceedings revealed that Jack had nothing to do with the incident, and ultimately all charges against him were dropped. Particularly interesting, however, was the moment when the prosecutor, despite convincing arguments against Henry, refused to reopen the case. He claimed that the original investigation had been conducted correctly and ignored the fact that many important details had been overlooked. This decision triggered public outrage, and only 2 days later the prosecutor found himself forced to reconsider his decision and agreed to reopen the investigations. Unfortunately, the reopened investigations were based on the original data, including the statements from Henry and Pam. Therefore, the investigators searched for new suspects who resembled Jack, which however led to no significant results. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was discontinued. Christie's father did not give up finding out the truth, and even went so far as to file a civil lawsuit against Jack. Although he did not believe that Jack was involved in the incident, this procedure would give him access to the case files and the possibility to study them. Unfortunately, these efforts did not bring the desired results. In the year 2006, Christie's father's health deteriorated, and he could not continue the fight. Christie's story came to a standstill for many years until it caught the attention of a former lawyer named John Waller in the year 2013. He decided to start his own investigation by contacting everyone who was connected to the case to search for new clues. Christie's family handed him a box of documents that her father had collected. After reviewing these documents and numerous conversations, John came to the conclusion that no one other than Henry was behind the incident. In his investigations, he discovered that his girlfriend Christy Carroll did not exactly have the best hobbies at that time. Upon further investigation, he found out that she was most likely a regular customer at Henry's. This became a new connecting link that connected her with Henry and could explain why the girl went into the forest. John suspected that the whole story with the DJ was just invented and that Carol was actually meeting Henry in the forest to buy something. Possibly she invited Christy under a different pretext to join her, using the same invented story. One of the theories stated that Christy was possibly there at Henry's request, who intended to perform inappropriate actions toward her. However, his plan did not work out, as the traces on his hands and face show. Ultimately, an incident occurred that soon became publicly known. In the course of investigations into this case, John discovered that Henry had already had several other incidents. Among them was an incident with his wife Pam that never came to court. In the year 1982, Pam filed for divorce. 1 month later, she was found in her own apartment where she was still living with Henry. According to the note found, the cause of the incident was a large amount of sleeping pills. But Pam's relatives believed that Henry could be involved in the incident, especially since the packaging of the sedative was not found in the apartment, which Pam would unlikely have disposed of herself. This part of the story remained the most mysterious and required further investigations. In the year 2013, when a new lawyer took over the case, Henry faced serious health problems at the age of 63. Nevertheless, he did not give up his work and published a book that summarized all information about the Christie case. This publication awakened renewed interest in the incident, and Christie's relatives, together with other interested parties, began actively demanding a reopening of the investigations. At the same time, several relatives of Henry approached John, claiming their family had long known about his possible involvement in the incident, but had preferred to remain silent. One relative told a story that occurred a few months before her birthday when Henry gave her a car. During the drive, he suddenly offered to stop and explained that he had been involved in this crime. He told her details about the events, but the woman initially did not believe him since she assumed it was an invention because Henry often drank alcohol. However, after she had read John Oller's book, she saw the situation in a new light. All these events led to the investigations being reopened in May 2014. In the following months, further interrogations and evidence analyses were conducted. In the statement of Henry's relative, details were mentioned that had previously attracted no attention. While medical experts had previously found no evidence on Christie's clothing, modern technologies enabled the discovery of minor traces. Unfortunately, they were so minimal that DNA analysis was not possible. The investigations continued until the end of 2015, after which a press conference was held. 40 years after the events, the investigators declared that they had no doubts about Henry's involvement. Had he still been alive, one could have initiated an official procedure against him. Unfortunately, however, it was not possible to bring the case to court. It was classified as solved and the investigations were concluded. Without Henry's confession, the police could not be completely certain what had happened that day. However, the investigators had an approximate idea of the events. Apparently, Henry went along the path behind the shopping center where Carol might have lured him under the pretext of a purchase. The exact circumstances of this moment remain unconfirmed. After he had encountered Christie alone, Henry decided to act according to the situation. Afterward, he returned home and began together with his wife to develop a plan to escape the consequences. Over the years, Carol has never shared the whole truth, which does not exclude her possible participation in the events. Perhaps she will one day reveal what happened. During a press conference, the police apologized to Christie's family for the mistakes that their predecessors had made. In the early stages of the investigation, there was sufficient evidence to charge Henry, but the earlier investigators apparently overlooked or ignored these clues. A girl named Jessica disappeared mysteriously from her own bedroom. Her sister, who shared the room with her, revealed an unusual detail. Allegedly, during the night, a person with a magical hat had come into their room. The police found some clues, but the investigations remained unsuccessful for many years. Only 35 years later did a chance discovery bring to light a truth that shocked everyone. Jessica Gutierrez was born on the 3rd of December 1981 in South Carolina, USA. She was the youngest child in the family and had 2 sisters and 1 brother. After her birth, her parents separated, and her mother Debbie took over the upbringing of all 4 children. They lived in the cozy small town of Edmond, not far from the capital area. Despite the modest living conditions, warmth and friendliness always prevailed in their home. When Debbie was working, the older siblings looked after Jessica, and in her free time, the mother organized various family activities. On the 5th of June 1986, ordinary summer activities took place. 4-year-old Jessica played in the garden with her brother and sisters while Debbie did housework. In the evening after the shared dinner, Debbie put the children to bed. Normally, Jessica slept with her mother in one bed because of her age. But that night, her brother felt unwell, and Debbie decided that he should sleep next to her. That evening, Jessica went to bed together with her sisters. The oldest sister took a separate bed, while the younger one shared the bed with Jessica. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, Debbie woke up and first saw 6-year-old Rebecca, who asked to make her breakfast with cereal. When she got up, Debbie noticed that something was wrong. The front door stood wide open, and the family dog, who is normally outside, was running through the hallway. Debbie noticed strange things, like a curtain rod that lay under the window and the absence of a protective net. She hurried to her daughter's room. There she did not find Jessica, but noticed that papers were scattered on the floor. Rebecca told that during the night a man with a magical hat had come, but Debbie thought it was just a joke. Debbie searched the house and the surroundings, hoping to find Jessica playing hide and seek. When she did not find her, she returned and began to question Rebecca urgently and demanded explanations. The younger sister repeated her story about the mysterious visitor, which disturbed Debbie. She could not understand why Rebecca had not called for help if the events had developed that way. Under the pressure of the questions, Rebecca finally shared more precise information about what had happened. In the late night, Rebecca awoke because of strange noises next to her bed. She noticed a figure next to her, dressed like a wizard from fairy tales, with a long beard. This person carefully took the sleeping Jessica in their arms and left the room. For 6-year-old Rebecca, this appeared only as a dream. Therefore, she crawled under the blanket, hoping that everything only sprang from her imagination. She soon fell asleep again, and in the morning did not even remember it to tell her mother. When Rebecca told Debbie about the events, she immediately called the police. The officers who arrived quickly understood that something serious had happened. They entered the house through the living room and noticed that the mosquito net on the window had been removed. Around the house, they found a fingerprint on the glass and some cigarette butts. To attempt contact with the person who had possibly come in the night, the investigators connected recording devices to Debbie's landline phone, hoping that he might call. Rebecca repeated her story and mentioned that the wizard-like person turned off the fan when they approached the bed. Since Rebecca could not clearly recognize the person's face, the officers decided to have an in-depth conversation with Debbie and brought her to the station to question her in detail about the events of the last 24 hours. During a conversation with the police, Debbie shared her suspicions regarding the person whom she held responsible for her daughter's disappearance. She told that she had ended her relationship with a man a few days earlier, with whom she had been together for several months. According to her statement, he reacted very violently to the separation. Debbie suspected that this might be his way of reacting to the breakup. She tried to reach him while she was at the station, but he denied any involvement. The police officers checked his alibi, but found no evidence that connected him to the incident. They also checked the young woman's father, who lived in another state and could not be involved in the incident. Additionally, the experts examined the fingerprints that were found on the window, but there were no matches in the FBI database. Subsequently, the police organized search actions around Jessica's house, which was located on the outskirts of the city next to large agricultural fields. They searched abandoned buildings, forest strips, and bodies of water. The following day, the FBI joined the search actions, however, without finding any traces. During this time, the police distributed flyers in neighboring cities and throughout the entire state, while the sheriff deployed an airplane to monitor the area. The search process lasted several days, but unfortunately brought no results. During all this time, Debbie had a difficult time, as she had to care for 3 other children and therefore could not actively participate in the search. The police made an effort to inform her regularly about the progress of the investigations. On a Saturday, Debbie, concerned about her daughter's disappearance, set about inquiring with the sheriff whether the search would continue on the weekend. Her concern led to a tense phone call in which she expressed her dissatisfaction because she assumed that the police were not doing enough. The sheriff, for his part, explained that he had worked all night and warned that his team might withdraw if the accusations continued. Debbie had recorded this conversation on her phone, which automatically saved all calls. The months passed, and the woman's hope of finding her daughter increasingly faded. But 10 weeks after the disappearance, the investigators came across a series of unconnected crimes. A man tried to break into a stranger's house but was deterred by the owner, who used a self-defense tool. After that, he stole a car and drove to the neighboring state where he tried to break into the house of a sleeping woman. Soon after, he was arrested, and his fingerprints matched those that were found on the window of Jessica's house. The suspect was 27-year-old Thomas McDowell, who had met Debbie through relatives only a few months before the girl's disappearance. As soon as Debbie learned of this, she immediately informed the police that she knew this man. Thomas was hired to perform various work on the property. Within 2 days, he managed not only to build a barn, but also to repair the roof over the porch. His unusual appearance drew all attention to him: a thick beard and a tall cowboy hat. Rebecca, who saw this mysterious guest only briefly and at dusk, might think his hat was a magic hat from children's stories. But there was an unexpected complication. Despite the matching fingerprints, the police expressed doubts about their sufficiency as evidence. First, there was no confirmation that Jessica had actually disappeared. Second, the presence of Thomas's fingerprint on the window could be related to his recent work on the property, although the probability that the print was left precisely in these days was low. During a thorough examination of the house, the experts noticed that the fingerprint looked untouched by time. It was not damaged by external conditions like the weather. Debbie, who regularly cleans the windows, said that her children often come to the open window when they are playing in the yard and want to say something, thereby leaving traces on the glass. Given their activity, she cleaned the glass frequently. Thomas had worked on this property 6 months earlier, but at that time, no other prints were found on the window. Debbie could not imagine that Thomas, who had once worked for her and was accidentally locked outside when she closed the door, could commit a crime. She did not think that the evidence of his innocence might not be sufficient for the police. After Thomas was convicted of a crime against a woman in her house in 1978 and sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, Debbie was desperate. However, no kidnapping charges were brought against him, which gave her no possibility to change anything. In the same year, there was a decisive turn. A fellow prisoner of Thomas informed the police that Thomas had confessed to him that he had committed another serious act in South Carolina that affected a young woman. According to his statement, the incident ended tragically after the victim had tried to defend herself, and Thomas then did something irreversible. He tried to hide the consequences of his act in a place where it would be difficult to find him. When the police came to obtain his statement, he agreed to speak only in exchange for immunity, which was unacceptable for the authorities. Thus, the investigators left the location without results. After the fellow prisoner learned that Thomas had escaped punishment, he wrote Debbie a letter in which he told the entire sad story. Over many years, Debbie has repeatedly expressed her disappointment with law enforcement agencies by criticizing their ignoring of important evidence and a potential suspect. She even decided to conduct her own investigations. One day, she discovered an abandoned car that Thomas had once used. Inside, on one of the seats, she found several threads and fabric fibers whose color matched Jessica's pajamas that she had worn on her last known night. Despite this discovery, the police saw no sufficient reason to continue the investigations. Furthermore, in 1987, police officers from Kansas contacted their colleagues and reported that they had found a girl whose description matched that of Jessica. Her mother immediately set out to go there, but upon hearing the girl's voice in the hallway, she recognized that it was not her daughter. In 1990, Jessica's story received attention in a popular television show about unsolved cases, which led to new interest and numerous tips, although all remained fruitless. A year later, Jessica became the first girl in South Carolina for whom an assumed portrait was created that took into account changes in appearance that could have occurred over time. It was the beginning of the 1990s when such technology was just gaining popularity. After many years since Jessica's disappearance, the case took an unexpected turn in 2007. Her mother came forward publicly with accusations of passivity against the local police and showed for the first time a recording of a conversation with the sheriff in which he mentioned the possibility of stopping the search. The sheriff rejected this and claimed that, on the contrary, he had increased the number of officers working on the case. Debbie, Jessica's mother, experienced difficulties when the local prosecutor blocked her attempts to involve other authorities in the investigation process. In the same year, the case was reopened, but there was not enough evidence for charges. In the following years, little changed until in 2014 the sheriff was charged with inappropriate behavior and dismissed, with 1 year on probation. 2 years later, the prosecutor also left his position after being caught drunk driving. In 2020, 35 years after the disappearance, a new sheriff named Jason resumed the investigations and requested support from a specialized FBI department that deals with searching for missing persons. In the case of the mysterious incident that occurred in 2022, the police showed special interest and deployed 50 officers. At the beginning of the investigations, the investigators delved into analyzing all details, conducted conversations again with every person mentioned in the documents, and carefully checked the evidence to search for new clues. This meticulous work led not only to sufficient grounds for suspicion against Thomas McDowell, but also indicated his possible involvement in the incident. New clues were obtained thanks to Thomas's relatives and acquaintances who noticed changes in his behavior immediately after the woman's disappearance. He changed his appearance, shaved off his beard and long hair, and stopped wearing his usual hat. Interestingly, Thomas also smoked the same tobacco brand that was found near the crime scene, although no DNA could be determined on the remains, presumably due to the limited analysis methods from '88. These details strengthened the suspicion of his involvement. The investigators also had a fingerprint from Thomas and the statements of an acquaintance. At the beginning of the year 2022, Thomas was arrested, and although he denied any involvement, The preparation for the trial took several years and began in January 2024. His defense tried to refute the existing evidence by claiming that the print could have been left on the glass during his visit to the building. It was also argued that a witness could have been mistaken when he saw a person in an unusual hat that he took for his usual one. In the trial, which ended on the 8th of February, the experts brought in by the prosecution emphasized that the print found at the crime scene was not old, as initially suspected, but fresh. They claimed that the print would have already disappeared or been altered under prolonged weather exposure. As confirmation, a former prisoner appeared who confirmed Thomas's story that he had already told him in the year 1988 behind prison walls. The prosecution insisted that a stranger from another state could hardly know such details of the case. It is known that Thomas had expressed the desire in the past to acknowledge his guilt, but demanded security guarantees from the police. Ultimately, Thomas was found guilty by the jury's verdict and received life imprisonment at the age of 63 years. For Debbie, who had been convinced from the beginning of the investigation that he was involved in the events, the verdict triggered mixed feelings. She was satisfied that the guilt was established, but recognized that the arrest could have taken place 36 years earlier. Instead, Thomas was allowed to lead a long life before being held accountable. Furthermore, Debbie was still concerned that the consequences of this tragic case were never fully uncovered, because even after decades, the searches for the truth led to no concrete results. New investigators, just like her, are not ready to give up. However, the chances of discovering the truth remain extremely slim.